Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome in to another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It's Thursday, December 10th. Hopefully you guys are having a great week out there so far. We finally saw some snow here in the greater Philadelphia area for the first time this winter. I guess it's not technically winter yet. That one's coming up here in a couple of weeks, but usually by this time we see some snow, and today were the first flurries. No accumulation, so I didn't have to bring out the shovel or the ice melter or any of that yet, but we did see Jack Frost in wintertime show up here to glisten on top of the trees with all the Christmas lights. So hopefully everything's going safe around where you are. I know the coronavirus and COVID continues to increase and be crazy here in Pennsylvania. We're looking at more restrictions across the state here shortly, and I know everyone's trying to do their best with the holidays and continue to stay in touch with the family, whether it's Zooming or whatever you're doing. But hopefully everything's going well for you guys out there. We got a great show lined up for you here today. Unfortunately, we're going to start with a little bit of a somber mood. The passing of Dick Allen, a baseball great. We're going to discuss that here in the first segment. Then we'll get into a couple of trades that were made at the winter meetings. Follow that up with rumors and news and notes that we're hearing coming out of everything Major League Baseball. And then we'll wrap up today's episode talking about the All-Major League team that was recently released Wednesday evening, I believe it was. Basically your all-pro team. So the best of the best, not an all-star game, but an all-pro, not a Pro Bowl, but an all-pro, for you football fans out there to kind of reference what exactly is taking place here. So jumping into this first segment, though, like I mentioned, I do want to discuss Dick Allen, who passed away this past week at the age of 78. He passed away in his hometown of Wampum, Pennsylvania, where he was born in 1942. And he was one of the best sluggers of the 1960s and 1970s. And honestly, after reading about him, watching some videos, listening to everybody talk about him, he led a pretty interesting career. I mean, he was not elected to the Hall of Fame based on his playing days. His final game came in 1977. And a lot of this is due to what is labeled as a controversial playing career. Apparently, reporters didn't like him back in the 60s and 70s. He was too opinionated. He fought with some teammates. He showed up late to work every now and then. But he was also battling racism pretty extensively. Once again, in the 60s and 70s, things were not great for African Americans. So here in the city of Philadelphia, it's written some stories where it was certainly a love-hate relationship for Allen and the fans. Looking back on it, of course, the more we learn and evolve as a society, the kind of better his career looks, just due to some of the obstacles that he was facing on a day-to-day basis. But now here in 2020, the timing of his passing is certainly cruel due to the coronavirus, because this past year in September, the Phillies, they did retire Dick Allen's number 15 to recognize him as one of the greatest players in franchise history. And this actually broke in an unwritten rule or an unofficial policy that the Phillies had, where they only retired players' numbers who had been enshrined into the Hall of Fame. So if you weren't in Cooperstown, you weren't getting your number retired in Philadelphia. But Hall of Fame third baseman Mike Schmidt, managing partner John Middleton, they both spoke during the ceremony about how much Dick meant to the game of baseball, how much he meant to the Phillies, and how he's been wronged in Hall of Fame voting, and it's just a matter of time until ultimately he gets into the Hall of Fame. And this is another unfortunate circumstance because here at the winter meetings in 2020, the Golden Days Committee, or basically the Hall of Fame era committee, whatever you want to call them, they look back on guys who played before the 1950s or from the 50s through the 70s and kind of re-examine their career, look back at their circumstances, and based on kind of today's game, ultimately determine if they were wrongly judged, rightly judged, and if they deserve another opportunity to get into the Hall of Fame. And the last time this committee voted was in 2014, and Allen fell one vote short the last time they voted. So there was certainly reason to believe that he would have made it here in 2020. The Phillies retiring his number, all the positive energy that was continuing to build around Dick Allen's career. And with the coronavirus, this 2020 vote was postponed until 2021. So Dick Allen, being alive, was not able to hear that he will be enshrined into the Hall of Fame. That would have happened a day or two ago, and here it is, instead of hearing that Dick Allen's going to be a Hall of Famer, if everything was right in the world in December 2020, we're now unfortunately hearing that Dick Allen has passed away, and he's not even going to be able to live in the moment to where he hears that he has been elected into the Hall of Fame. So diving into his numbers and kind of looking, is he Hall of Fame worthy? We'll look at some of his individual statistics as well as where he stood kind of across the league. And, you know, he was really good. I mean, he came up in 1963. He got a cup of coffee in the bigs with the Phillies, came up with the Fightin' Phils for the first 7 years of his career. He played 10 games in 1963, and then he completely burst onto the scene in 1964, where he played in all 162 games. He finished 7th in the MVP voting and won Rookie of the Year honors that year. So had himself a fantastic year. He hit .318, 29 home runs, 91 RBIs. He also had 38 doubles and 13 triples. So that's a fantastic year of 70 extra base hits on the year, 3 stolen bases, 67 walks. So basically stormed on, won Rookie of the Year, and continued to plug away from there. I mean, he didn't slow down. He did not have a sophomore slump. He followed that up in 1965 by being named an All-Star. He hit .302 that year, 20 home runs, 85 RBIs while playing in 161 games. So over the course of 2 years, his first 2 full seasons in the bigs, hitting an average of .310, 25 homers, 90 RBIs, and playing in every game. And you certainly begin to find out why this guy was feared amongst pitchers in the 60s. So 3 straight years, 1965, 66, and 67. He was named an All-Star for the Phillies. He finished 4th in the MVP voting in 1966. Hit .317 that year, 40 home runs, 110 RBIs, an All-Star again in 67. So it was a fascinating career in Philadelphia through 1969. He then bounced around a little bit. He spent a year in St. Louis, hit .279 with 34 homers for the Cardinals. The next year, he was an All-Star for them in St. Louis. Then in 71, he was with the Dodgers, hit .295, 23 home runs, 90 RBIs. And then he found a second home for the White Sox. He spent 3 years in Chicago, 1972, 73, and 74. He was a 3-time All-Star. He also won his only MVP in his first year with the White Sox. That year, he hit .308, 37 home runs, 113 RBIs in 148 games. He had a .420 on-base percentage, .603 slugging for a 1.023 OPS, which is very, very good for those of you who aren't accustomed to that number. Anything over 900, 1,000 is certainly outstanding. Bounced back again, an All-Star in 73 and 74. He then moved on from the White Sox back to the Phillies for the last 2 years, 75, 76, and then he had about a half a season in Oakland in 1977 to where he hung him up. So career-wise, where are his numbers? Where are they at in regards to Hall of Fame capacity? Well, it was a total of 15 years. He hit .292, 351 home runs, 1,119 RBIs. He had 133 stolen bases, 320 doubles, 79 triples. So the guy could rake offensively. A career OPS of 912 just goes to show you the kind of power that this guy used to bring to the ballpark. So, opposing pitchers, Goose Gossage is quoted as saying he's one of the best players he's ever played against. That's certainly high praise when it comes to all the guys that Goose has faced in his career. So, a total of 7 All-Star teams, like we said, the 72 American League MVP award, the 64 National League Rookie of the Year. When it comes to wins above replacements or WAR, again, as New Age Baseball continues to implement sabermetrics, analytics, kind of next level statistics for the current players, well, they're also putting these types of metrics or statistics on past players and past performances to try to get a feel or an update of ultimately how they would quantify or kind of cross over into today's game. And from 1964 through 1974, Dick Allen had a 58.3 WAR, which was tied for Willie Mays, which is 6th amongst position players in that span. So the guys above him, you're going to know the names. I'm going to read off to you. So let's see. Hank Aaron was at 68.8. Carl Yastrzemski, 68.1. Roberto Clemente, 64.7. Ron Santo, 60.1, and Brooks Robinson at 59.3. Then you have Dick Allen, and the names right below him are the names you're going to recognize as well. You have Pete Rose at 58, Frank Robinson, 55.4, Joe Morgan, 54.0. So those are your top 10 during that time. Dick Allen's right in the middle there at 6th, and obviously Hall of Famers above him, Hall of Famers below him. It certainly trickles your mind as to say, okay, how was this guy not elected to the Hall of Fame? He led the league in OPS 4 times. He led the league in slugging 3 times. On-base percentage and home runs 2 times apiece. RBIs, runs, walks. He did that at least once during his career. So he was traded 5 different times. Again, that's when he transitioned from team to team. So he got traded to the Braves, and he refused to report to Atlanta, and this kind of gets into, the mold of that he was a tough guy to deal with. He was, not a great teammate, and from the media's perspective, at that moment, things were certainly viewed differently. Like I mentioned with racism being firmly right in the middle of everything back in the 60s and 70s, Dick Allen, even during his, Hall of Fame or number retirement speech with the Phillies, talked about how he hated the city of Philadelphia at times and how they were not kind to him, but he's continued to grow. The city's continued to grow. They've continued to learn and, are certainly starting to mend that relationship and figure things out. But Dick Allen was a fantastic offensive force. He was the first minor league baseball player who was African-American in the state of Arkansas. So he, dealt with racism there. Jackie Robinson, of course, the first in the big leagues. But, Dick Allen was the first one they saw in Arkansas. So I'm sure those local fans were not the most kind to him there as well. But just wrapping up here, 2020 has certainly not been kind to Major League Baseball. And it's extremely unfortunate. But this is, the 6th time, 7th time that we've done a segment such as this. And I mean, yes, I enjoy looking back on the career of such fantastic baseball players, getting to learn more about them, more about their career, ultimately their accomplishments. But, I mean, from just the player position side of things, this year, 5 guys alone who we've talked about were Joe Morgan, Al Kaline, another Hall of Famer passed away, Dick Allen now, Jim Wynn, Lou Brock. Also, offensively, all of these guys had WARs above 45. And when it comes to the greatest of all time, that's high up on the list. And from the pitching side of things, this is where we talked about Tom Seaver. We talked about Bob Gibson, Whitey Ford, all of those guys, Hall of Famers. So that's 3 from the pitching side of things, and it's just overall been a tough year for Major League Baseball here. But certainly want to send our thoughts, condolences, prayers out to the Dick Allen family, everyone who's been affected by this. But he had a fantastic career as a Phillies fan. I know all about Dick Allen. They reference him quite a bit during the broadcasts or during historical references when they're talking about this is the first time it's been done since this point or that point. Dick Allen's name is usually up there on the list of top 5 or top 7 when they're talking about a really good accomplishment. So one last note here I had was that he also used a 40-ounce bat. It's known that he used one of the heaviest bats in baseball. For reference, I used a 34-31, so I used a 31-ounce bat during my playing times. I know guys get up to 2, 3, 4, but a 40-ounce bat, man, this guy was pretty much swinging a tree trunk out there. So if he connected with it, it was going a long, long way. But that'll wrap things up here for the first segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll step aside for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows, but when we come back, we'll talk about trades. Lance Lynn, finally on the move. Where'd he end up? Stick around, find out.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, and thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate you guys listening in here today. Before we get into our second segment, there were some trades, some transactions, some signings going across Major League Baseball. I do want to ask you to take a few moments to please rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher. I know there's more and more platforms becoming available, Speaker. Wherever you're at, if you can subscribe, please click that subscribe button, as well as give us a 5 stars, write a comment in the review. We'll read it here on the show. I always enjoy hearing from you guys out there. But we got a great segment here for you. We're talking about the 2 trades that have taken place so far at the winter meetings. There's also been a couple of signings. And then, of course, in segment number 3, we'll get into all the rumors, news, and notes that are coming out of the winter meetings. But the big trade thus far was the Texas Rangers and Chicago White Sox coming together for a deal that traded Lance Lynn from the Rangers to the White Sox. The White Sox, they received righty Dane Dunning back, as well as 2019 6th-round pick Avery Weems. So it was a 3-player deal going back. Dane Dunning is a big league-ready pitcher coming back to Texas. So from honestly both teams' perspectives, I like this deal because I like that Texas was able to get Dunning back, who started 7 games in 2020. He went 2-0 with a 3.97 ERA. So, a younger kid, just kind of up and coming. Texas certainly entering a rebuild. And then they also essentially get a lottery ticket. They take Avery Weems, a 6th-round kid just from last year. So, of course, he's highly thought of. He's a left-handed pitcher. And, man, he could be effective for them. He's only been in rookie ball. He was drafted out of Arizona, and then he went to Great Falls, and then he was in the Arizona Fall League. But .69 in the Arizona Fall League certainly is a positive development for Weems. And Texas may have a couple of starters in the rotation a few years from now. But from the White Sox side of things, they get themselves a 3rd starter at the top of that rotation to go along with Lucas Giolito and Dallas Keuchel. So now they have a 3-man rotation that's certainly at the top of the American League, and depth is key they found when it comes to the postseason. That offensive lineup is pretty much back in its entirety, so they once again should be heavily favored in the AL Central. And, adding Lance Lynn, who again has been very underrated over the course of the last couple of seasons, since his time in Texas, he's been one of the top starters in all of baseball. I mean, I know he had his troubles in Minnesota. People remember his time in St. Louis, but in Texas, over the course of 290 innings, he's got an ERA of 3.4, and if he can carry that over into Chicago, they may find themselves up at the top of the list with New York, Tampa, and the teams that are favored to win it. So what does this mean for the rest of the league in regards to Lynn now coming off the market and being a White Sox? So there are rumors going around that the Yankees, they were not ultimately too engaged with the Rangers. Yes, they have uncertainty behind Garrett Cole, but Twitter and local writers suggest that ultimately they weren't willing to give up the type of prospect that Dunning is to give back to Texas to ultimately compete with the White Sox offer. So, however, it is said that the Padres, they were in pretty heavy on Lance Lynn, which makes sense, obviously, because Clevinger is going to be out. Lamet's coming off a 2020 injury as well. They already owe Machado, Hosmer, Pomeranz, Myers. So they got a good club there, and they're a pitcher or two away. Now they may transition over to kind of the next level trade market. Sonny Gray, rumored to be available. Blake Snell, or do they look more on the free agency side of things with Walker or Buehler, or go that way? So Dunning going back to Texas, he's going to be monitored. He missed 2019 due to Tommy John surgery. Again, came back in 2020, pitched 34 innings over the course of 7 starts. So Texas is going to take it easy with him, but I think we'll find him heavily involved in the big league rotation when it comes to 2021. So I'm glad the Rangers finally moved on. They caught some flack for not flipping him during this past summer, but once again, reports came out after the season that it was talked about that Lynn could opt out for the remainder of 2020 if ultimately he was dealt to a location that he really didn't want to go to, or for a team that he really didn't want to pitch for. So if you're Texas, you don't want to ruin relationships like that, so you hang on to him until the offseason. There's a little bit more stability into what we're looking at for 2021, particularly as you get to the conclusion of the 2021 baseball season. The picture looks to get brighter and brighter when it comes to fans, economics, and things like that. So the White Sox do give up a career of Dunning for 1 year of Lance Lynn, but I like it in a move that says they're going for it, and now ultimately they could be a free agent or two away from being the team to beat in all of baseball. But another trade was made, this time by a team out west, the LA Angels. They acquired Raciel Iglesias, the closer from the Cincinnati Reds, in exchange for right-hander No Ramirez and a player to be named later. Ramirez last year was 1-0 for the Angels in 21 games. So a relief pitcher himself. But ultimately, this is a good move for the Angels. They needed additional pitching in all aspects, whether it was starting pitching, relief pitching. And Iglesias, he's no slouch. I mean, he comes over being the closer for the Reds the past couple of seasons. He's been there 6 years so far in his career. This is his last year. He just came to an agreement on a $9.125 million contract, and he'll be a free agent coming up after the year here, after his arbitration runs completely clean. But so far for his career, Iglesias, he's been a bit up and down, but more good than bad. 2020 was a good year, 2.74 ERA in 22 games. Let's see here. The year before, 2019, he had a 4.16. That was a bit of a down year for him because the 3 years prior, ERA of 2.53, 2.49, and 2.38. Certainly a very positive. And the guy's strikeout to walk ratio is certainly very impressive. I mean, for his career, it's 480 to 130. So you're looking at almost 3-1 there, 4-1. 31 strikeouts to 5 walks last season. The year before that, 89 strikeouts only to 21 walks. So Iglesias, not very well known across Major League Baseball by the casual fan. First, because the Cincinnati Reds haven't been very good, and then, he hasn't had a lot of save opportunities when it comes to the past couple of years, because he's had 34-30 in 2019 and 2018, but a 2.38 ERA and a 2.49 ERA certainly lends you to think that those numbers would have been much higher if he was on a good team. So the Angels are adding a solid closer, hoping to, pair him with Mike Trout and finally get him to the postseason. This was new general manager Perry Maniason's second trade. He acquired shortstop Jose Iglesias from the Orioles earlier this offseason. Of course, the Angels losing Andrelton Simmons in that position. So he adds a shortstop, he adds a relief pitcher, and the hopes are that Iglesias can continue to succeed out there. So he had a bit of a drop in velocity, but ultimately learning how to throw, still had the terrific strikeout-to-walk ratio like we talked about. A ground ball pitcher when he's not striking guys out, 41.5% ground ball rate. So I really do like this move from the Angels' perspective. And from the Reds side of things, they just they continue to shed salary. Last week they non-tendered Archie Bradley, which was a bit surprising. He was one of the guys on the list who could have been non-tendered and ultimately was. There's rumors that they're open to moving on from Sonny Gray, who still has 2 years and $20 million a year on his contract. So Iglesias was signed for $9 million. They took him off the books. And Bauer will most likely not be back. So with Iglesias out of the picture, the payroll drops to about $120 million for the Reds. And Amir Garrett, he should take over for Iglesias. Lucas Sims should move over. Michael Lorenzen is probably going to move into the starting rotation. So the Reds could still use another bullpen arm from that side of things. But the Reds, they're just a bit confusing to me on the surface. I would love to hear from some Reds fans in the comments to kind of let me know your thoughts. But, added a few pieces last offseason. Mike Moustakas, Nick Castellanos, you have Trevor Bauer. You guys make the playoffs, but now ultimately looking to move on from Bauer, but yet could be adding Francisco Lindor. So are you guys just allocating your money in different areas, or what's the end goal out there in Cincinnati? I'd love to hear from some of you Reds fans, because I just think they're kind of waiting a little bit and shedding salary, but I don't know what the end goal is, what level they're trying to get to, and ultimately how much they're trying to spend, because that could be, fascinating to just kind of see where they end up. So those were the two trades so far during the winter meetings that have taken place. There's been quite a few rumored and discussed. We'll get into those in more detail coming up in segment number 3. Here I do want to discuss the other signings that have taken place across Major League Baseball. Some of these are minor league level contracts, some major league level, but a handful of individuals have changed locations here over the past 2 days. So Cheslor Cuthbert was signed to a minor league deal by the Cincinnati Reds. First baseman Carlos Santana signed a 2-year deal with the Kansas City Royals. So Santana, again, was let go by the Indians. And, ultimately, I don't know how to feel about Carlos, because I'm a Carlos Santana fan, but his time with the Phillies, the 1 year he was there, he really was a disappointment. And then they sent him back to Cleveland, and he turned into an all-star, the year after he left. So he hit .229 in Philly, went back to Cleveland, hit .281, but then this past year was back to 199. So I do think he's on a bit of a decline. He's been in the bigs for 11 years now, but he's a walk machine. He's an on-base machine. And I know in Kansas City, that's the style of baseball that they like to play. Even when they were winning the World Series, they were putting the ball in play. They weren't striking out a lot. They're making the other team make plays, putting them back on their heels. And Santana does fit that mold, because even though he hit 199, he still had an on-base percentage of .349. And this was due to 47 walks to only 43 strikeouts. Year prior, 108 walks, 108 strikeouts with the Phils, 110 walks, 93 strikeouts. So the guy still has a fantastic eye at the plate, but I do think the bat speed is tailing off just a little bit here when it comes to, ultimately if he's going to be able to bounce back and become an all-star in Kansas City. So I also think his veteran presence there will help that clubhouse as they continue to try to develop young talent, try to compete, and, come back into that phase of not being in the basement of the AL Central. So Trevor Hildenberger signed a minor league deal with the Mets. Brian O'Grady signed with the San Diego Padres as a free agent. He signed a one-year deal moving into the 2020 year. So he was a former Tampa Bay Ray. He can play all three outfield spots, a little bit of first base. He doesn't hit real much, 213 averages in his career, kind of a AAA, big league level guy. So a depth piece certainly out there in San Diego. Matt Wisler was signed by the San Francisco Giants, right-handed pitcher. He agreed to a $1.15 million deal. He was a surprise non-tender by the Twins last week, but he throws slider after slider after slider. He threw 83% sliders in 2020, finishing with a 1.07 ERA. So only threw 25 innings, but was a high-level reliever for the Twins. I guess they don't see extended performance coming out of 83% sliders. Maybe they feel the league's going to catch up to that over time. But for the Giants for $1 million, I think it's a nice signing for them. And Gabe Kapler gets himself a toy out there in San Francisco. But the Giants also signed Chadwick Trump to a minor league level deal. And, of course, we had the signing here of Adam Eaton to the Chicago White Sox. So Adam Eaton, he agreed to a one-year, $7 million contract with a team option of 8.5 for 2022. So he is, headed back to Chicago. I honestly, I don't know if I love this deal for the White Sox. I know Eaton, he was in Washington the last handful of years. He's been effective for them. He did not have a great 2020 season, hitting .226, but the 3 years prior, he hit .301, .297, .279, so certainly showed that he has some gas left in the tank there. But I wanted them ultimately to make a move for George Springer to kind of get everything over the top, but Adam Eaton is a nice piece there for the outfield in Chicago as they add Lance Lynn and Adam Eaton here in just a matter of days during the winter meetings to set themselves up. So are they the team to beat already in the American League? They could be, or they could be a move away from putting themselves in that conversation. But what are the rumors? What are the news? What are the notes? We're going to talk about that when we come back. Right now, we're going to step aside for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll get you guys up to date on everything going on coming out of the winter meetings. So stick around, everyone. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you haven't done yourself a favor and checked out the other shows that we have within the GSMC Podcast Network, I don't know what you're waiting for. I mean, there's a ton of great quality content. If you're into football, there's fantasy football, college football. There's some chaos going on there with Ohio State, the college football playoff coming up. If you're into basketball, I mean, training camp, regular season's only 2 weeks away, so get back on the horse there. You also have other things like books or music, movies, television, anything you can think of, cars, politics, it's there within the podcast network. So do yourself a favor, type in GSMC into that search icon wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll find a lot of quality content there. We certainly appreciate everything you guys do out there for the podcast network. But into some news and notes, it's become more and more clear here over the course of Wednesday evening that the Mets are going to sign James McCann to what looks like a 4-year deal. It doesn't have a dollar value assigned to it yet. That should be coming out here shortly. But the Mets going with James McCann as opposed to JT Realmuto. And I think this has a bit to do with the larger picture that they're looking at there in New York. So McCann, 30 years old. He hit .289, 7 home runs, 15 RBIs in 31 games last year for the White Sox. He was an all-star in 2019 when he had a tremendous first half. He hit .316, but then tailed off after that. But certainly a solid catcher. Everybody considered him the number 2 option on the market behind JT Realmuto. He's known also for his value behind the plate defensively. He sits in the 88th percentile. This is according to Baseball Savant when it comes to framing pitches and getting calls for the pitchers. He also throws out would-be base stealers at an above-average rate when it comes to the rest of the league, and he is +5 defensive runs saved last season. So that put him 4th among all Major League catchers. So the guy's a solid all-around contributor. He hasn't put it together for 162 yet, but he is going to help assist that New York rotation, I think, tremendously. I mean, this was a need for them because Thomas Nido, Ali Sanchez, Wilson Ramos, none of those guys are either Major League ready or coming back for the Mets. So an upgrade from Ramos to McCann for that pitching rotation, and I think this is a nice move for the New York Mets because Marcus Stroman, he accepted his qualifying offer. He'll be back after sitting out 2020. They just traded for Trevor May, and there's still 2 big fish out there that the Mets are very much considered for. So the 3 biggest free agents of the offseason are, of course, George Springer, JT Realmuto, and Trevor Bauer. And the New York Mets were considered to be getting 2 of those 3 as their offseason goal, entering the new ownership and all of that coming to fruition here. Well, if you go JT Realmuto and one of the other 2, it kind of lends your resources to not be used as effectively to fill all 3 positions because all 3 are still positions of need for the Mets. They're just trying to get the best accumulative amount of talent for that price tag. And I think that by trying to go Trevor Bauer, George Springer, James McCann, you're going to utilize that dollar amount and that value to its highest potential. I think this is an excellent maneuver by the Mets because they're quote-unquote moving closer to signing either Springer or Bauer, according to Bob Klapisch out of the Newark Star-Ledger. But he does have an and/or on that connotation. So he talks about how they could be looking to add both. I mean, if you go DeGrom, Stroman, Bauer at the top of that rotation, of course you add Springer, McCann, Sprinkin, Pete Alonso, a couple of the other young guys in that lineup there. And the New York Mets are certainly in an enviable position for the rest of the NL East because my Phillies, they continue to try to find a general manager. They were just basically shooed off by Thad Levine and the Twins, and then the gentleman for the Dodgers said no thanks. So we're really down to Michael Hill of the Florida Marlins to come in and run the ship. But apparently they're not liking what they're hearing, the candidates, that is, I mean, because they're saying thanks but no thanks by the time they get to the end of the job interview. So the Mets willing to spend the cash, looking to get potentially 3 of the 4 or 5 biggest fish and put themselves right into the running for 2021. So let's continue around the league here. Kyle Schwarber he has quite a few suitors. I mean, people are coming after Schwarber. There's a market for a guy who had 38 home runs in 2019, mashes right-handed pitching. Of course, Angels manager Joe Maddon worked with him during his time with the Cubs, so the Angels are being mentioned. The Blue Jays are being talked about, possibly the Yankees showing interest in Schwarber. So a handful of teams are actually early on Kyle Schwarber. But a little bit off the record here, but the KBO MVP, Mel Rojas Jr., who we talked about in last episode, basically being one off from the Triple Crown, well, he's moving from Korea to Japan. So he found himself a nice 2-year, $5 million deal with Hashin in Nippon in Japan. So he's upgrading from Korea to Japan. So shout out to Mel Rojas taking that next step here and moving forward. But let's see. The next up on the rumor list, we have the White Sox. Are they done? We just talked about them adding Lance Lynn, and they had a meeting in the previous segment here. But Jason Stark has come out with a tweet that says the White Sox aren't through shopping, according to teams and agents that they've talked to. They're not out of the running yet on Michael Brantley, and they still could add another starting pitcher. So this is an interesting tweet because the biggest remaining hole could be the bullpen. I mean, Alex Colomé is going to be a free agent, but USA Today's Bob Nightingale reports that the White Sox have set their sights on right-handed relief pitcher Liam Hendriks. So Brad Hand, Mark Melancon, Kirby Yates, Roberto Ozuna could also be options for the White Sox. So from the outside looking in, it certainly looks like that bullpen could utilize some help. But from what we're hearing around the winter meetings, the White Sox are actually still in the market for an outfielder as well as potentially another starting pitcher just to add to the depth of that rotation. So interesting offseason, interesting winter meetings continue with the White Sox as they're going for it this year with adding Lynn, Eaton, and potentially Michael Brantley amongst others. So more rumors or news here is that the Blue Jays, quote-unquote, think the world of Francisco Lindor. So general manager Ross Atkins, he couldn't go as far as saying that they're trying to trade for Lindor, but he was certainly giving him his high praise and a glowing review on Tuesday. So, the Blue Jays, they've been rumored to be having conversations with Cleveland to possibly be interested in adding Lindor above the border. And, though the GM did nothing to debunk those rumors here over the past couple of days. But the Blue Jays, they were also involved when Hyunjin Ryu, he met and had dinner with Ha-Seong Kim, who was the shortstop being posted by the KBO, who we talked about a few episodes back as being right there as a top shortstop option for teams, being in his late 20s. A lot of different fan graphs has him projecting from the KBO to the major league level. They've put together different statistics, analytics, algorithms, and, they have him hitting in the 270s, 20 home runs, something like that. Well, he recently met and went to dinner with Ryu, and of course, Blue Jays fans are making the assumption that Ryu is pitching Kim on what it's like to play for Toronto and come this way. But as details continue to emerge, it's basically come out that Kim set up the idea to meet because Ryu, having come from the KBO, had success stateside. Other guys from the KBO has failed. I'm sure Kim's trying to talk to as many people who have made the transition as possible. So he reached out to fellow countryman Ryu. Those two sat down, and I'm sure they talked about the Blue Jays, but it doesn't seem to be kind of the recruiting pitch or recruiting gathering that some people think it was. But it'll be interesting to see ultimately where Kim ends up. Of course, we have until January 1st to sign Kim and post his, over international cost or whatever you want to call it over there for KBO. But it'll be fascinating to see where he ends up. So next on the list, the Yankees and DJ LeMahieu. Of course, LeMahieu, he's widely believed to be a top priority for the Yankees this offseason. But the Yankees are known to kind of have some stern price limits when it comes to negotiation. ESPN's Buster Olney, he's talking about how he's starting to get the sense that this could compare to the negotiations with Robinson Cano after the 2013 season, where they basically say, hey, this is what we're willing to pay you, and they aren't willing to significantly exceed that dollar amount. No matter what LeMahieu thinks he's worth or what he can get elsewhere, the Yankees play a little bit of hardball and say, hey, this is what we're willing to give you, so ultimately take it or leave it. But I do think LeMahieu ends up back with the Yankees. I don't think this is something that ultimately could ruin the relationship, but I don't think LeMahieu is going to be too happy with the Yankees for the next couple of days. So speaking of the Yankees, they're looking to bolster that rotation. Lance Lynn, of course, they were in on him, but not overly too involved with those trade talks. So where do they go from here? They're not going to go to Sonny Gray. They're not going to want to reunite with him. So it's Tanaka, it's Walker, it's other second-tier Odorizzi, second-level free agents, and ultimately as Yankees fans, you can't be too happy with that list of names. I mean, yes, you have Garrett Cole at the top of the rotation, but the rest of that rotation, Severino coming off an injury, certainly lends you to be a little bit anxious in regards to that it could be the downfall for the 2021 season. So, speaking of Sonny Gray, we talked about how the Yankees wouldn't be interested in bringing him back, but according to John Heyman, several teams have showed interest in Sonny Gray, and the Reds are currently gauging that interest. But there was a quote-unquote that the Reds are working hard to trade Sonny Gray. So it looks like they're going to lose Trevor Bauer in free agency, move on from 20 Gray rather than pay him the $20 million that he's owed, and continue to look to rebuild and continue to look to add a shortstop. Again, there was another report saying they're prioritizing the addition of the shortstop position, whether that's Trevor Story, Francisco Lindor, or free agents like Didi Gregorius, Simmons, but it's an interesting move out there in Cincinnati, and I certainly want to hear from you Reds fans out there currently listening to this. But Jackie Bradley Jr. could still return to Boston. Brian O'Halloran said that he's still on the radar. They're still seeing what his price tag is, ultimately what he could get out there on the market. But the 2016 All-Star and Gold Glove winner, they're not completely moving on from in Boston. Mike Fiers, the Blue Jays are among the teams interested in the veteran right-hander. He had a 4.58 ERA last year and 11 starts. He finds himself kind of in that middle tier of starting pitching that really could go anywhere. So the Blue Jays showing interest in the 35-year-old. Let's see here. Sugano was officially posted by the Yomiuri Giants. We spoke about him in episodes past and what the market could look like for him out there, whether it's the Angels, the Giants, or somebody like the Yankees or Cubs could get involved, but he was officially posted after a career 2.34 ERA over the course of 8 seasons in the professional Japanese league, as well as the 2-time winner of what essentially qualifies as their Cy Young winner. So Urena and Williams, a couple of free agents. Urena was let go by the Marlins, Williams by the Pirates. They're drawing interest by a handful of teams, more than half a dozen showing interest in each of them. So both of those guys were recently non-tendered by their squads, but are finding interest out there on the market. Blake Snell recently talked about finding himself being traded, and he said all the right things. He's ready for whatever. He's aware that it could happen at every point. He loves it down in Tampa Bay, but certainly is open for whatever happens. And then one of the last rumors I want to discuss here for the past minute or so is the Phillies. Are they fielding trade offers for Zach Wheeler? Buster Olney pointed out that the Phillies were in a financial crunch after Middleton has let go of different personnel, and Zach Wheeler being the second highest paid Philly behind Bryce Harper. They could be interested in moving on from him after 1 year of just signing him, and then the Phillies owner came out and said that's completely preposterous. Nothing like that is happening. Wheeler, he wouldn't even trade him for Babe Ruth. And the two sides of this are, One that, yeah, I believe somebody called the Phillies about Zach Wheeler. And as a general manager, and a good general manager, if you are a good general manager, you pick up the phone and you listen to the conversation about any one of your players. Now, do I think that conversation went anywhere? No, I don't, because Zach Wheeler has been fantastic for the Phillies, and he's exactly what they're looking for at that price tags. But yes, I think somebody called, and of course, all the writing on the wall, the Phillies moving on, all the reports that they don't want to sign big free agents, even though they're a big market team, it certainly lends you to believe that Wheeler could be available. So I would pick up and call them, and if I'm the Phillies, I would listen, but I don't believe Wheeler is going anywhere this offseason. But we'll wait and see. I mean, a ton of these moves could be happening here over the next 24, 48, 72 hours, with the winter meetings ultimately coming to their conclusion with the Rule 5 draft over the next couple of days, which we'll discuss on Monday. But that'll wrap it up here now for segment number 3. We'll pause for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows, but when we come back, we'll talk about the All-MLB team that was recently released. Any surprises, or was it just status quo? Stick around and find out, everyone.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate you guys listening in today. Do me a favor, share this episode with one of your friends. Be a friend, tell a friend. If one of you guys text one of your buddies, your dad, your brother, your uncle, family member, friend, whoever it is, and say, check out this baseball podcast Mondays and Thursdays. They got this boy Kev on here who's pretty solid, bringing you guys all the latest information and everything you need to know about Major League Baseball. But we got a fantastic fourth segment for you guys here. We're discussing the All-MLB team that was released Wednesday night. And if you're thinking to yourself, I've never really heard of the All-MLB team, what's going on there? Well, I got some information for you. So this is only year 2 in regards to which they actually do this quote-unquote, I guess, award or recognition, accomplishment, whatever it may be. And I talked last segment briefly on how in the NFL they have the Pro Bowl and then the All-Pro list. And the All-Pro list is the one that's more heavily weighted when it comes to respect, because the Pro Bowl tends to be a popularity vote, but All-Pro are the guys who are recognized as the best at their positions. And again, with baseball, this would be very similar because there is the All-Star game, which of course takes place halfway through the year. So there are some people who have a fantastic first half, make the All-Star game, struggle down the second half, and their year-end statistics aren't that great. Well, in that case, they would be all-stars, but probably not all MLB players. So this award will, recognize sustained success throughout the course of the regular season. Who decides on the award? Well, the selection process, it starts in November. It's a 50% van vote and then a 50% quote-unquote panel of experts. So a lot of media members out there, people close to the game, they vote on who they believe should be first team, as well as there is a second team that is selected as well. So think back to the college days, All-American, first team, second team. Well, this is All-MLB, first team, second team. And if this continues, this is also something that happens in other sports where a lot of the incentives in your contracts can be tied to All-MLB teams. In the NBA, if you make All-NBA, first, second, or third team, you can get a certain number or hit a certain level of incentive. In the NFL, if you make All-Pro, that's when you get another incentive. So here you are with the All-MLB team in its second year of existence, and potentially you could see it more and more as they utilize it in contracts. But since it's in its second year, and I don't remember even hearing about it last year in its first year, I wanted to look back on last year's winners and read off the list for you guys out there, first and second team, and then ultimately we'll get to the 2020 winners and let you guys know who took home the awards this year. But last year for 2019, second team, of course, this would be a fantastic all-star team if it was across the board, but the team consists of one position player for each position, three outfielders for the three outfielders, a DH, then there are 5 starting pitchers as well as 2 relief pitchers that are nominated. So 7 pitchers per class per team. And starting out with 2019, let's jump to the second team here. So we'll start off behind the dish. Yasmani Grandal of the Brewers. He had a fantastic year last year. Freddie Freeman, Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, and Marcus Semien is the surprise name there at shortstop for the A's. Second team All-MLB last year. Your 3 outfielders consisted of Ronald Acuna Jr., Juan Soto, and Mookie Betts. And the guys on the first team certainly make that hard to argue in regards to keeping those guys off of that first unit. But designated hitter was Yordan Alvarez. Of course, he came on, lit the world on fire last year. He was fantastic down there in Houston. He had an injury this year, so we won't see his name on the list when it comes to the 2020 selections. But the starting pitchers, you have Zach Greinke, Hyun-Jin Ryu, Jack Flaherty, Charlie Morton, and Mike Soroka. So Charlie Morton makes the list. He had an excellent 2019 after a brief setback there in 2020 when it comes to statistics. Relief pitchers Aroldis Chapman and Liam Hendricks were both fantastic last year. But again, the first team guys, tough to argue with here. So 2019 first team All-MLB players. Starting off at the catcher's position, you had JT Realmuto of the Phillies. At first base, Pete Alonso from the New York Mets. DJ LeMahieu and Anthony Rendon round out the infield there. Rendon of the Nationals at the time, of course. You have Realmuto of the Phillies. And then shortstop is Xander Bogaerts. So Xander Bogaerts would probably be the name on the list here. If you put all 20 of these names in front of me, first and second team, and said, hey, which one do you think doesn't belong amongst the rest? That would be one of the first names. But Xander had a heck of a 2019. Not taking anything away from him. I'm just saying, based on the rest of these names here, that one is the one that doesn't fit in amongst the rest. But the outfield slots, the 3 of those went to Mike Trout, Cody Bellinger, and Christian Yelich. So those 3 guys, of course, you have a couple of MVP winners in there from 2019. And it's going to be tough to overtake those guys in 2020. Nelson Cruz was your designated hitter. Starting pitchers were Garrett Cole and Justin Verlander of the Astros. You had Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg of the Nationals. And then you sprinkle in Jacob deGrom there in the 5 spot for the first team. Rounding out the relief pitchers were Kirby Yates of the Padres and Josh Hader of the Brewers. So a few surprises last year. Looking back at it now, all those guys had fantastic years. The starting pitchers, can't argue with any of those. Relief pitchers, of course, there's only 2. But Hader had a fantastic 2019. And again, the outfield, the infield. So certainly no arguments or complaints from myself when it comes to the awards last year. But 2020, let's get to the second team this year, and then we'll discuss the first team kind of as we go. But second team for 2020, JT Realmuto of the Phillies. He goes from first team to second team here in 2020. At first base, you have Jose Abreu, which is one of your MVP winners, but both MVP winners came from the first base position, so difficult to have both of those guys on the first place All-MLB team. we have Brandon Lowe at second base for the Rays. And honestly, I would have to do some research to see who else we could put into this slot, but Brandon Lowe had a fantastic start for the Rays. He was your leader for AL MVP when it came to the gambling odds at one point during the regular season. I remember discussing with you guys, but he really struggled down the stretch in September, so I do find it a bit surprising that he was able to hang on and maintain that second team nod there for the Rays. But Jose Ramirez at third base for the Indians. He was in MVP conversation, although he does come up short and finishes second. I think you could argue him for a first-place finish here, but your winner also had a fantastic year as well. Cody Seager at the shortstop spot. Of course, everybody knows now his postseason heroics, everything he did for that Dodgers run, NLCS MVP, World Series MVP, but his regular season didn't live up to that type of level that he performed at in the playoffs. So he finishes with the second team nod there. Ronald Acuna Jr. gets his second straight second team nod from the outfield spot. He's joined by Mike Yastrzemski and Michael Conforto, both making the list here for the first time. Nice to see Mike Yastrzemski make the list as a young candidate there for the Giants after a nice season. You have Nelson Cruz going from first team to second team designated hitter. He is now with the Twins here with the starting pitcher spot. We have Garrett Cole, who went from first team to second team. He is joined by quite a few new names here, including Dinelson Lamet from the San Diego Padres. So a young stud starter out there in San Diego. Lamet finds himself already receiving second-team All-MLB nods. That's fantastic for him. Clayton Kershaw gets the nod here at the second unit. Kenta Maeda for the Minnesota Twins had a fantastic year. Hyun-Jin Ryu for the Blue Jays. He continues his strong back-to-back second-team finishes here, one with the Dodgers, one with the Blue Jays, so switching leagues, switching countries. It's just impressive to watch Ryu continue to just perform at a high level. The two relief pitchers we had were Brad Hand, who who enters the list here for the first time, and Devin Williams, the Rookie of the Year in the National League, and his Sidewinder Airbender make the list for the second unit. But the first unit here, really no surprises. Like I mentioned, just at the third base spot. I mean, everybody knows the names we're going to read here at shortstop, but really across the board, you can't argue it much at all. At the catcher spot, you have Salvador Perez for the Kansas City Royals. He had a fantastic bounce-back year for Kansas City, coming off the injury like we talked about. He had Tommy John surgery. He had a 986 OPS, which was about 200 points higher than his career norm, so you couldn't have expected anything more out of him. First base, you have Freddie Freeman. He battled COVID, but came out of it, won the MVP award, had his best year, hitting 341, 37 extra base hits. He was excellent. Second base, DJ LeMahieu. He led the league in average at 364, so he's a back-to-back first All-MLB first teamer there, so he's the only guy to go back-to-back. At third base, this was the one we talked about, but Manny Machado got the nod at third base. He hit 304, finishing third in the National League MVP voting, so he had a fantastic year for them. In the outfield slots here, we had Mookie Betts, Mike Trout, and Juan Soto. So Juan Soto and Mookie Betts go from second team last year to first team this year. Soto only played in 47 games, but he was excellent with a 351 average and a major league high 1.185 OPS. Trout finished fifth in the MVP voting, which is probably a disappointment for Mike Trout, but he had fantastic numbers again. And then Mookie Betts settled right into his time there in L.A. The shortstop spot, Fernando Tatis Jr., I think I jumped over that one here earlier. He led all shortstops in homers, RBIs, runs, and at the age of 21, he's only really getting started. And the five starting pitchers that were first-teamers this year, let me scroll up here to get them on the list. No surprise, starting off with Shane Bieber, the unanimous Cy Young. I mean, clearly he was going to get one of the nods. Trevor Bauer, the Cy Young in the National League, getting the other nod. And then the final three, one of them filled with Jacob deGrom. He came up just short of his third straight Cy Young award, but was obviously excellent again with a 2.38 ERA. But Yu Darvish also got a first-team nod. He was victorious in 8 of 12 starts, a 2.01 ERA, so he was excellent for the Cubbies this year. And then you had Max Fried rounding out the rotation, as the rest of the Braves rotation went down with injuries. Nobody performed well, so he stepped up 7-0, 2.25 ERA, and was excellent for the Braves out of the rotation spot. And then the two relief pitchers we have here, we have Liam Hendriks. He now goes by the nickname of Herculeum, which I was unaware of, but I certainly love that. And now I want the Phillies to sign him even more, just with the nickname of Herculeum. But he improved on his crazy numbers from 2019. He had a 1.78 ERA, 12.3 strikeout to walk ratio. He was fantastic. And then you also had Nick Anderson of the Tampa Bay Rays. And yes, everybody remembers the playoffs, what happened to Nick Anderson, what happened to the manager Cash down there, and everybody's second-guessing all the moves. But Nick Anderson, 0.55 ERA in 16 regular season innings. He certainly earned his place on the list here. And then the designated hitter, this one you could probably guess, but Marcell Ozuna. After Nelson Cruz took second team, that really left Marcell Ozuna. He benefited from the DH in the National League, hitting .338, 18 home runs, and 56 RBIs. So that's just another fun list. I mean, I certainly enjoy it. If there's an All-NBA team, an All-NFL, All-Pro team, there certainly makes sense to be an All-MLB team. It's just a matter of figuring out what type of reward, whether it's going to be contracts, incentives, or just getting a plaque or having a nice picture up on the wall for you. But that'll do it for today's episode. It is Thursday, December 10th, and we are hanging in there across America. I know I'm continuing to dig down deep as the holidays are coming up. We got through Thanksgiving, getting my Christmas shopping done, my holiday shopping done, trying to stay safe with the family and everything, coming up here over the next couple of weeks with the new year and so on. But I certainly appreciate it and am very thankful that I can continue to talk to you guys out there. So one last time, I'll ask you, check us out on social media, share us with your friends. Please rate and review the podcast, again, within the algorithm within Apple. That goes further than you guys could certainly be aware. I know I appreciate it, and we all do here within the podcast network. But that'll do it for today's episode. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, I'll talk to you guys again next Monday. Enjoy the weekend, everyone.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.